My name is Melany Bentfield, and today is March 26th, 2026, and the time is now 1:30. We are at the Pewaukee VFW. I'm interviewing Bonnie Gluth, who was born on April 12th of 1952 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and served in the Vietnam era from 1973 to 1977. Bonnie Gluth was a Spec 5 in the Army and served as a traffic analyst. And this interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Hello, Bonnie.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you today?
Good.
Well, it's very nice that you could be here today, and I'm excited to get through this interview with you.
Well, good. I'm excited to talk to you.
All right. Why don't we start with what were you doing before you enlisted in the military?
I was working for Wisconsin Bell. I had just been from high school. I was doing that and also going to UWM part-time. So that's what I was doing. Found it very hard to do that well, to go to school and work part-time. So
What were the views of your family that when you told them that you were thinking about enlisting in the military?
my father said, "Why not the Navy?" Because he was in the Navy. And my mother said, "Are you crazy? Do you see what they wear?" So they weren't real keen on it. There weren't a lot of women in the military. I think at that time it was like 8% were
Wow.
females. So
Wow. And when you were enlisting in the military, what was going on in the world at the time when you were serving?
Vietnam was winding down, but guys were still being drafted. And I thought that wasn't fair that only males were forced to serve or asked to serve and females weren't, because I believe everyone has some allegiance to this country and should do some service. So that was my reason for joining.
And then after you enlisted and went through all the signing up and everything, what was your next steps, like basic training?
Uh, Basic training was in Alabama. It was in October, so it was kind of a change of seasons, and it was also at that time 1973 seemed to be a big transition for the military because I went in and for basic training we wore little green shorts and a wraparound skirt, and a green blouse that we had to iron, and when the next class came in they were wearing fatigues. So you see, there was going to be a change on what women were going to be doing.
And then how long were you at basic training for?
For 8 weeks, and that was a difference too. In my basic training, I did not fire a weapon. I wasn't trained in an M16, but 4 years later, in order to get out, I was in a tactical unit and I had to then qualify with a weapon to get out. So it was kind of a backwards introduction, but
And then while you were in training, how were the roles of women changing in the military?
um, changing significantly. Women now, like the job that I went for, traffic analyst, and linguist, was not open to women until that time frame. And there were a lot of other. Uh, they opened up every military specialty except for combat pilot to women. So you didn't have to be a nurse and you didn't have to be a secretary. You could be a lot of other things.
Oh. And then what were the stereotypes of women in the military? Like you said how jobs were opened up, but what was the extreme that they could go to?
The highest, the extreme would be actually they could be pilots but not flying combat. So that was probably the most extreme.
And while you were in basic training, what was a challenge that you had to face, the biggest challenge in your trainings?
Sharing a latrine or bathroom with 42 other women, and also sharing a and so it was an open bay. It wasn't like a two-person bedroom. It was 42 women in a big auditorium with bunk beds. That was a change.
And then what was how did basic training impact the rest of your service going through?
Um, there you learned about teamwork and about being on time and being where you should be at the right time, and also the importance of learning how to make a bed. So it was very tight. So the one thing that they always had you make your bed, so in case you had a really bad day, when you came back, at least your bed was ready for you. So, and that stuck with me the whole time.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your biggest takeaway from your basic training experiences that stuck with you even to this day?
Camaraderie. It when I was growing up, there weren't like women team sports, so we really weren't towards like guys had basketball, baseball. Women didn't, but in the military, you did. You were assigned groups to clean things, like latrines or kitchen duty as a team. So that was a big thing, and that it helped going forward, and that has
Mm-hmm.
stuck with me.
Okay. And then, so when you were wrapping up at your basic training, what was like your next steps from basic training?
For basic training, I actually got to go home. It was at that time it was right over Christmas holidays. I got to spend some time with my folks because I was going to the Defense Language Institute of West Coast, and that wasn't starting till January. So I had a few weeks in between. I didn't realize that those few weeks in between that I took were also not going to be mine to use again. That was kind of like a forced leave. It was good. It was because once you were at the language school, you couldn't leave for 56 weeks, so you were there.
And then where was this language school that you attended?
In one of the most beautiful places in the country, Monterey, California, which is absolutely gorgeous.
And then what was that training school like? Like what was like a day-to-day
I would say
process?
very comparable to going to college, except for that you wore a uniform, and that during your lunch hour you had to stand for an inspection. They would make sure that you were dressed appropriately. Um, but after that, and it was a kind of an 8 to 4:30 day, and then you had homework, and you could they had tutors because I was in Russia. It was a very difficult language, and fortunately, our instructors, most of them were native speakers, and they were very willing to give their time up because they wanted to make sure they turned out a quality linguist. Plus, we had CIA and FBI in the same programs, so there was a need. These people really needed to know what they were doing.
And then so you were learning Russian, and
Mhm.
how did you pick up learning Russian so like comfortably?
Not comfortably. Not at all. And at that time, you had a big reel to reel tape recorder that you'd go back to your room at night and just study it and for hours because every day you were tested both verbally and that you had to be able to write the language.
Mhm.
Because actually, I spent more time writing than speaking for
Really?
sure. Hmm.
And so you said that there were other branches like the CIA at this language school.
Hmm.
So were there different um, schedules between you, like the military, and then like the FBI?
Yes, all the branches of the military were there except for Space Force because that didn't exist at the time. So they kind of kept them separate. We were like, this is your Army class, this is your Navy, this is your Marine. But FBI and CIA, they were much smaller classes, and it seemed like they didn't have the homework, the testing that we had. So that was different. But
Oh, so they got the easier end.
yes, they got the
Oh, okay.
easier end.
Wow.
Yes.
And after the 56 weeks
Hmm.
that you were at the language school,
Hmm.
were you like comfortable speaking and listening to the Russian?
Um, I was the first word when the first time that you listen to this, the first word they give you is attack, and they say, if you ever hear this, you want to raise your hand and make sure somebody comes over and listens to what you're listening to. Um, so it was different. It wasn't at all. I thought I was going to be sitting in an embassy greeting people, saying hi. That wasn't the job. I
Oh,
found that out later.
and then how were you like? What was like living life at at the language school?
It was like a college dorm. I had a roommate that was from California. We had hours that meals were served, and we had study halls. So very much like college.
Okay. And then what were your next steps after the language school?
Going to Air Force Base. It was funny. I'm trying to remember what the name of it was for not Morse code intercept, but for the learning the tracking. Because I mean, you could learn to speak and learn to write, but you had to be able to learn the equipment to use to how to track these people and listen to them. So
Okay, so you're
that
like
was
learn what like the machineries that you were
yes,
using.
yes, little, and you sat behind a little curtain, yeah. So
And then so after your specialized schooling was over, where did you go after that? after like learning all the
I went to Germany, to Augsburg, Germany, field station, but I didn't have my clearance yet. And that's another thing because of the job I was doing, you had to have a top secret clearance. And I wasn't cleared, so I got to work with the MPs typing police reports for several months until my clearance came through. So
then how did you get that clearance?
Uh, well, they actually investigate. I mean, my mom said somebody from the FBI came to talk to us and wanted to know what you did. I said I was in high school. I didn't do anything, too drastic. So, and they would interview your family and look into your family, make sure there was like I think no debt and that kind of stuff. And my dad was a veteran, so I think that helped. Maybe I don't know.
And then, so I understand that you were a traffic analyst
hmm
in the military, and what did that all include while you were stationed?
Listening to Russians on the other side. I was at a border site, so which meant living or my office was a construction trailer, which was hot in the summer and very cold in the winter, and shared another construction trailer that was a makeshift latrine with 42 guys. I mean, it
Oh,
was like not the best, but the advantage to that is I lived in an apartment in Germany. I had a roommate, so I didn't live in a barracks. So that was
oh,
very different. And I didn't have to eat army food, which was another plus. We had to, and learning to shop in in a foreign country is an adventure. I bought horse meat when I thought it was ground beef, and I
oh.
things like that. So it was an adventure.
So while you were, so you were in an apartment and not on the barracks, so you were not on base then?
No, it was just a real small, like a couple construction trailers and a big antenna.
Oh,
And it was in the middle of a forest. And once in a while, Germans love to walk. They do these Volts marches, and a whole group would come upon us, and they look at this antenna and go, "Oh." But we had English. The English were right down the road, and so they did have big antennas too. And they thought, okay, they're doing something here. So
and then what did, like, while you were working and like had your job, what did like a normal day to day schedule look like for you?
we had rotating schedules because it was a 24-hour operation. So you could work days and then you'd work mids, which would be like from a 3 to midnight, and then you'd work an overnight um, from midnight until 8 o'clock. And they realized that if going from a day shift to a mid shift, that's pretty easy. Mids to after that, it's hard to go then from a midnight shift back to a day shift. So you usually got like 4 days off to kind of readjust to. It's a tough schedule.
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't like.
Then while you had your days off, how would you occupy your weeks with those off days?
Um, One of the big advantages to being where I was traveling. I mean, I lived like a half a block from a train station. My roommate was very much into traveling. We would go. One time we took a few days and went to Paris. Then we spent some time in Copenhagen, a lot of different places in Germany. So was a real highlight of the
Mm.
tour there.
And then while you were like overseas, did you have expectations and were they met, or was it the total opposite?
Let's see. I think more overseas, it was more just exploring. It was so different. I didn't know what to expect. Coming back to the States, that was a different story.
No. And then what was the most enjoyable part about your day to day operations?
The people that I worked with, because some of them, I have to say, were the smartest people I've ever, they were just incredibly intelligent and analytic and
Mm.
willing to share, like maybe you ought to try this. And so that was a big,
Oh.
big thing.
And then while you were working, like what were you like? So you said that you were listening for the word attack. Was there anything else that you were like key?
Just key military terms if you'd hear anything like that. You're just we were kind of tracking movements. If they were here and then you'd go to that same spot on your little radio dial, they weren't there the next day. So then you'd have to figure out, well, where did they go? Kind of seeing where they were moving
Mm-hmm.
in East Germany. Yeah.
And then what was like how was your home life like working through like being stationed overseas?
I was single when I was overseas, so it was. I think I don't know like how some of the guys did it that had families and had young kids,
Oh,
trying to put them in a school over there. So I think a lot of times single is a good way to go into the military. But I did get a husband out of it, so it was okay.
were you able to like visit home at all while you were stationed, or did you have to wait until you were
Um,
done?
I decided you got 30 days of leave a year, so that's like 4 weeks. But I decided to spend when I was in Europe. I
Mm-hmm.
went to Paris and traveled a lot. And my plan was to get out and also do 6 months of traveling afterwards. But I got rotated back early because someone thought women at that time weren't fit to serve more than 24 months overseas.
And so
So
how did that work out with you having to go back home?
Uh, I was very unhappy because that wasn't my plan, and It, um, it was called the Nunn Amendment. It's Sam Nunn. He was a senator out of North or South Carolina. He came right out and said he didn't think women were fit to serve 2 years overseas, and so only women got sent back. Guys could stay, and it was funny, we had a guy, his name was Sandy, it was Sanford, and he got orders to go home and he was all excited because he wanted to go. When they found out he was a guy, it's like, no, you're staying, she's going, and he said, well, can't we switch because we did the same job? And they said, no. So they still had these ideas that there were, yeah, you can be in this job, but not as long as a man, or, it's kind of aggravating.
And how long were you expecting to stay overseas? Because you said it got cut short.
I was expecting to stay a full like 26 months,
Oh,
and it didn't. I got there. I was there because I had a 4 year enlistment, but the language school was it was over a year, and then I
mm-hmm.
had another training. So I thought, well, I'll just finish out in Europe and then do my traveling. But that was when they decided women couldn't stay that long. So I was rotated back. And they said, where do you want to go? I said, anywhere west of the Mississippi. Fort Carson, back to Presidio. I got Fort Meade, Maryland. I think the only place further east would have been Fort Devens, May. So, yeah, that's another life lesson.
So that brings us back to after you got sent back home from being overseas. And what were those steps that you took after coming back home? And you said Fort Meade.
Mhm.
So where was that, and what was your like next steps?
Fort Meade is in Maryland, and because I was Army Security Agency, we had very nice billets, much nicer than regular Army, and it was different to suddenly be back in. Had a roommate who was also from Wisconsin, which was kind of cool, but back with sharing a bathroom with all these women in the morning, that was a big adjustment.
And then what was like while you when you came back home? What was your next job from like after being in Fort Meade? What was your job there?
At there, I was actually a courier between the S2 security people and NSA. So I would take classified documents back and forth and would I could only work with them in NSA, and then I'd go back to my little security office and actually interview people for security clearances. That was interesting. That's how I met my husband, was interviewing them. So I thought I knew about him.
And what does NSA mean, and like what do they do like as a whole?
Well, it stands for National Security Agency. It's called the Puzzle Palace. It's for smiling because we can't really tell you what they do, but they do a lot of important, I say, logistics, figuring out what's going on and where it's going on.
Oh,
The very important things like what's going on in the world.
like the background information and
Hmm.
putting the puzzle pieces
The
together.
yeah, exactly. I think these two are working together. That's what they
And then, what was your most memorable part about being like in Maryland at Fort Meade?
do. I think I don't know if it was memorable because it was a lot of joint services, and we had a Navy barracks right next to us, and it was guys, and they were just crazy. So I think that was pretty memorable, and also how bad the food was. It was,
Oh,
it was terrible.
what was the food like then?
We called it mystery meat because you were never sure what it was.
Oh, so that's very different from when you were like living in an apartment
And
and you got
cooking
to
my
choose.
absolutely what I
Uh-huh.
wanted, yes.
And then what do you like consider to be your most important contribution while in like the service?
Um, I, I think the projects that I worked on, just the intelligence part that contributed to some kind of significant things. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then what was it like transitioning to civilian life after like being stationed and then like being done in the service?
That was interesting because, like I said, I had gotten married while I was in the military. Uh, so we weren't sure what we wanted to do. So we came back to Wisconsin, and my husband was from California. So the first winter here was a real shock for him. So we both went back to school. So, and that was not that different because I was kind of used to being in school,
Mhm.
studying and being disciplined. Yeah.
And what was like what what do you miss most about serving? Like when you were like transitioning through like going back to civilian life? Like what is one thing that you like wish you could have kept doing?
I think one of the things I miss most are the people from like all over the states that I wouldn't have met otherwise because our paths would have never crossed. I think definitely the people.
And what is one like lesson you'd want everyone to know about being in the military?
Uh, I think camaraderie, teamwork, in that you get a lot more done as a team than as an individual. You can make a great contribution, but as a group, you make a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And so like those lessons that you learned, like how have you put those to like put them into action while being out of service?
Um, One, I became a computer program analyst for AT&T and T, and then became a manager. And I think some of the skills I learned working as a group, how to motivate people, and that I think those carried over for sure.
And then after you were done in the military, what were your next like steps after leaving? Like finding a job, finding a place to live. Like how did those all like play out?
Fortunately, I had a job waiting for me, a better job when I came back, and a place to live. Since now I was married with a husband, we stayed with my parents for a little while, but they said, "You two need to find a place." So we did find a place of our own in Pewaukee. So it was good.
Yes. And while you were working through like all like the challenges of coming back and trying to find things, what like were like the things that you could come back to and like really understand like you were were on the right path?
Came back to friends, even I was gone 4 years. I realized that you can keep them even if there's distance and time in between. Came back to family, realized how important they were. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
And then how like what is something like what it was it like to be like what was a surprise like coming back home after being overseas for so long?
um, how people drove. I mean, it's different in Europe. It's not better. It's different. It's faster. It's very fast. Um, I think that, and just when you shopped, like in Germany, a grocery store was the size of this room. I mean, and there were no supermarkets unless you went into a big city. And it was funny that when I was in Augsburg, which is a beautiful city, upstairs at the street level would be like a department store where you'd buy clothes and everything, and then you'd take an escalator down and the supermarket was under the store. That so it was kind of fun to come back to where they're separate and they're big
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of variety.
And then how like and at the end of the day, like would you recommend like a young woman going into the service?
This might sound strange, not at this time, for a lot of reasons. unless you have your heart set on something that's only done in the service. Like the
Mhm.
job I had done is mainly done in the service. A lot, I'd say NSA hires people right out of the military.
Mhm.
And I don't think you'd get to fly a jet unless, so it's another thing. I mean, the military academies I think are great opportunities. Women didn't get to attend until 1976. So I was on my last year
Oh,
because I would have loved to have gone to the Naval Academy. It's
really?
a beautiful occasion, and the education you get is incredible.
And
Yeah.
then after like years after you came back home, what were some things that like, I guess you could say like benefits that you got out of being in the military?
I think flexibility, being able to, my husband said, we're going to Southern California. I was, okay. And being able to move around easier because I've run into a lot of people that, I'm never leaving Wisconsin, or I worked out east for a while. I'm never leaving New Jersey. So I think military, you become more flexible and you kind of have maybe a little wider view. There's more to see, there's a lot to see out there. And it's okay to fail at things. You'll find a niche that you will really, that's your calling. And that takes a little experimentation.
I see you're wearing a hat that says Honor Flight. And then
Yes.
can you tell me a little bit more like about like what that all includes?
It's a program, in fact, it's someone in Pewaukee, there's a gentleman that's very involved in it, where they take veterans to DC. And I was on a group with mainly Vietnam veterans because I was Vietnam era. I was the only woman on the flight, so you kind of get singled out. And I thought, here we go again. It never ends. But they take you, it was a really jam packed day. You left like at 5 in the morning out of Mitchell Field, and then you get to DC, and there's all these people. It was so moving, lined up, and they had like service dogs and military band and all this stuff. And you get on buses, and they take you all around DC to all the different monuments. And I had lived in DC for 7 years, and a lot had changed. There are a lot of really cool monuments. The World War II one is amazing, and they have a new one, a women's monument. And then um, I didn't know it, but before you go on this, they have people that, write letters to you. So they do mail call. Like that was a big thing in the military, especially when you're overseas. I want to hear from somebody I know. And people would write letters, and some of them were very sweet, very touching. And it was mainly fathers and sons, some fathers and daughters. I took my grandson because he teaches history, and he was in school at that time. So it was great for him to see DC, and I could share some of that with him. And it was just a really neat experience.
Mm-hmm. And then what would like if you didn't go into the military at the time that you did, what do you think? How do you think your life would be different than it is now?
Um, I would not have married a guy from California. I would have gotten a degree in teaching instead of in data processing. There would have been a couple different things. Yeah.
And if you could go back, if you could change what language you decided to choose to learn instead of Russian, what do you think that would be?
German,
German?
because there's so many countries that it's spoken in, and it's an easier language and same alphabet. So these are all important things.
So how was like Russian different than like the
uh,
alphabet?
we have a Cyrillic alphabet. The letters are actually different,
Oh,
and there's more of them.
more
So
of them.
more, so, and it's I had like I said, a lot of our teachers were native speakers, and it's very guttural. So it's hard to listen to sometimes. And they'd say, "Well, go down to the wharf in Monterey and listen to the sea lions. That's the sound you want to make." And I'm like, "Oh, this isn't one of the romance languages for sure."
Oh. Right. And then what was a life lesson that you still use to this day then?
uh, Teamwork, and that I don't have to do it all by myself, that there are people to help you around. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how, like, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome, like, in total? even like till this day?
It may sound funny, but it's actually relying on other people because I was fiercely independent as a kid and as a young adult, but they take that out of you a little bit. I think that's that would be it, being independent.
Mm-hmm. And how, like, before like we end, like, is there anything like major things like you would want to like make sure everyone knows, like going like no like relating to the military or the army?
For young ladies thinking about it, definitely, and guys too, if you're willing to put in the work and the time attending one of the military academies, if you can go to the Naval Academy, West Point, any of them, you will get a phenomenal education and you will not come out in debt. And you will have to spend some time paying it back as being an officer, but I think would be a great career move.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then I just like to say like thank you so much for being here today again. And then it's been great to getting to know your story.
Well, you've been just a joy to work with, and I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share it because I know there's still kind of a stigmatism sometimes, especially with women in the military, and to say it's okay and you can do a lot and see a lot. So it is another career path to explore.
Yes, definitely. All right, and then thank you.
And thank
And
you.
then in closing, this has been an interview of Bonnie Gluth regarding her service in the Vietnam era. My name is Melany Bentfield, and the time is now 2:10. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your
Your service.
service.
Thank you for doing
Thank you.
this.